Imagine crawling through a pitch-black tunnel, so narrow that your shoulders scrape against the cold limestone on both sides, your helmet light the only glow against suffocating darkness, and the silence broken only by your breath echoing back at you. In 2013, a team of scientists led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger experienced exactly this in the Rising Star Cave system near Johannesburg, South Africa. The chambers deep within this cave were so inaccessible that only scientists of a certain body size could enter, a fact that forced Berger to recruit a group of extraordinarily brave women cavers, later nicknamed the Underground Astronauts, to descend into spaces barely wider than a human torso. It was in these impossible depths that bones began to surface. First a fragment here, and then an entire hand, a foot, and finally the unmistakable skull of a being that seemed human, but also not. Over the course of days, the cave revealed more than 1,500 fossil specimens belonging to at least 15 individuals, a staggering number in paleoanthropology where often a single tooth can define a species. Berger and his colleagues soon announced to the world that this was a new kind of human relative, which they named Homo naledi. What made this discovery electrifying was not just the sheer quantity of fossils, but the context in which they were found. A hidden chamber so isolated that it was almost impossible to imagine the bones arriving there by accident. The fossils were not swept in by water or dragged in by predators. They appeared placed, deposited with deliberation, as if someone, perhaps the species themselves, had carried their dead into the darkness and left them there. In his book, Almost Human, The Astonishing Tale of Homo naledi and the Discovery That Changed Our Human Story, 2017, Berger describes the overwhelming feeling of stumbling upon a site that seemed to hint at behavior long thought unique to modern humans. The sheer improbability of the setting, combined with the richness of the fossils, made scholars pause. Could a small-brained hominin, with an estimated cranial capacity no larger than an orange, have engaged in practices resembling burial? Or was there another explanation waiting to be uncovered? In that moment, the Rising Star Cave was not merely a fossil site, it was a challenge hurled at the entire field of human origins, a mystery wrapped in stone and bone, whispering to us from the shadows of prehistory.
To understand why the Rising Star discovery caused such a shockwave, we must place ourselves in the shoes of scientists who for over a century had built a ladder of human evolution where intelligence and symbolic behavior climbed neatly with brain size. For decades, the prevailing narrative suggested that only hominins with large cranial capacities, like Neanderthals with their 1,400 cubic centimeters or early Homo sapiens with similar brain volume, were capable of behaviors that hinted at culture, ritual, or spiritual awareness. Burial, in particular, was considered a hallmark of humanity, a dividing line between mere survival and the dawning of symbolic life. When Berger's team announced that Homo naledi, a species with a brain capacity of merely 465 to 610 cubic centimeters, might have intentionally placed their dead within a cave chamber, it was akin to suggesting that a sparrow had written poetry. The skepticism was immediate and fierce, yet fascination equally so, because the sheer volume of fossils could not be ignored. Picture the chamber, crawling for meters through passages so tight they were given names like Superman's Crawl. Researchers finally emerged into a room where skeletons lay scattered across the sediment, whole hands curled into death, spines intact, skulls resting as though in sleep. No claw marks indicated predators, no rushing sediment suggested flood, no evidence of collapse explained why so many individuals, young and old alike, were preserved together. Berger, Hawks, and their colleagues published their initial findings in eLife in 2015, presenting the case for a new species and cautiously hinting at deliberate deposition. Their words ignited a firestorm. Some researchers accused the team of sensationalism, while others marveled at the courage to propose such a paradigm-shifting idea. As the news spread beyond academia, the public imagination was instantly captured. Headlines proclaimed that our tiny-brained cousins might have buried their dead, and comparisons were drawn to Neanderthal burials in Shanidar Cave or early Homo sapiens burials in Israel. Yet unlike those cases, Rising Star offered no grave goods, no ornaments, no flowers pressed into the soil. Only bodies, left in silence. And so the question lingered, had Homo naledi performed the earliest known act of respect for the dead? Or had chance alone gathered their bones in the Earth's deep throat? As you picture that chamber, lit only by the flickering headlamps of explorers, you sense why this discovery is not merely about anatomy. It is about rewriting what it means to be human, about questioning whether we alone invented mourning, ritual, and memory, or whether the seeds of these acts were sown long before us by small-brained creatures who dared to enter the darkness. When scientists first began carefully laying out the fossil bones of Homo naledi under bright laboratory lights, what emerged on the tables was a puzzle that seemed stitched together from different eras of human evolution, like a chimera of deep time. Their skulls were small, with cranial capacities ranging from about 465 to 610 cubic centimeters, closer in size to Australopithecus species that roamed millions of years earlier than to Homo sapiens, who average around 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. Yet despite this small grain, the structure of their hands revealed long, curved fingers reminiscent of climbing apes, suggesting arboreal habits, while their wrists and thumbs bore the marks of dexterity, hinting they could manipulate tools with surprising finesse. Their shoulders leaned toward a primitive configuration, sloping in a way that supported climbing and suspending themselves, almost like our distant ancestors who still spent part of their lives in trees. At the same time, their lower limbs, legs, knees, and feet looked startlingly modern, as if they were designed for efficient bipedal walking, striding across open ground like us. It was this blend, primitive on top, modern below, that bewildered paleoanthropologists. Were these creatures a relic? A late surviving branch that carried old traits into a more recent world? Or were they an experiment of evolution that blended ancient climbing ability with a modern gait? Reconstructions show a small-bodied hominin, averaging about 1.5 meters, 5 feet, in height, and weighing 40 to 55 kilograms, with a narrow chest, a flared pelvis, and a jawline lacking the delicate chin of modern humans. When you picture them, you must imagine beings that would look both familiar and alien, walking upright with confident steps, yet their heads smaller and differently shaped, their eyes perhaps deep-set, their expressions carrying a mix of animal wildness and human spark. What startled scientists most was not just the mosaic of anatomy, but the fact that these beings lived far more recently than their features suggested. Dating efforts, eventually refined, revealed that Homo naledi lived between 236,000 and 335,000 years ago, shockingly recent, overlapping in time with early Homo sapiens in Africa. According to the original eLife publication in 2015 by Berger and colleagues, this meant that in southern Africa, a species with a brain half the size of ours coexisted alongside our direct ancestors, potentially sharing landscapes, perhaps even crossing paths. Imagine, then, Africa 250,000 years ago, not a land dominated solely by the ancestors of humanity, but a patchwork world where different kinds of humans walked the same trails, where in one valley you might find modern-looking people shaping stone blades, while in the next, small-brained Naledi navigated caves with hands still shaped for climbing.
The very existence of Homo naledi forced scholars to question the neat ladder of progress, suggesting that human evolution was not a simple ascent, but a tangled bush full of overlapping lineages, survivors, and surprises. If intelligence and symbolic behavior were not tied neatly to brain size, then perhaps we had underestimated the potential of these beings, dismissing them as primitive, when in reality they may have held within them the capacity for acts that we once thought were uniquely ours.
What makes Homo naledi particularly mysterious is not only their unusual combination of traits, but what these traits might mean for how they lived, moved, and interacted with their world. Their long, curved fingers speak of creatures still at home climbing vertical surfaces, possibly sleeping in trees or scaling rocks with agility, much like the Australopithecines of 3 million years earlier. Yet their long legs and arched feet show a confident walker, someone capable of covering distance on the ground. This dual adaptation suggests a flexible lifestyle, one foot in the trees, the other on the savanna floor, a survival strategy that might have allowed them to persist while other hominins vanished. Their teeth and jaws, smaller than those of more robust ancestors like Paranthropus, hint at a diet not of crushing hard seeds, but perhaps more varied: roots, tubers, small animals, maybe even shared scavenged meat. If you close your eyes, you might picture a band of Naledi moving through the African landscape, small figures with steady strides, children clambering over low branches while adults gather food, their bodies lean, their movements efficient. But what of their minds? That small cranial capacity has long been used as a shorthand for intelligence, but evidence increasingly warns us against equating size with complexity. The structure of their brains, as revealed by endocasts, suggest frontal lobes proportionally arranged in ways not entirely unlike ours, potentially supporting more sophisticated behavior than raw volume would imply. The real shock came when dating showed that these beings survived into an era when Homo sapiens already existed in Africa. The overlap is not minor. It raises the possibility that two radically different kinds of humans could have encountered each other. Were Naledi isolated, tucked away in hidden caves, or did they share landscapes, trade glances, or even compete with our ancestors? The thought is chilling and thrilling at once. To imagine walking across Africa 250,000 years ago and finding not only those who look like you, but others, smaller, stranger, still human in their way. The paleoanthropologist John Hawkes, co-author of Berger's work, once described the discovery as a game changer because it shattered the assumption that small-brained hominins had vanished long before our rise. Their persistence until the late Middle Pleistocene meant that the African stage was far more crowded than we ever imagined. As readers of the eLife Papers 2015 know, this revelation forces us to revisit questions once thought settled. Who counts as human, and what capacities define us? If Naledi walked with modern posture, used hands shaped for tool-making, and perhaps engaged in behaviors as profound as deposition of the dead, then the wall separating them from us grows dangerously thin. Perhaps their story is not just an odd footnote in our family tree, but a mirror showing us that humanity is not a single line of progress, but a kaleidoscope of possibilities. And so, as we move forward, one question lingers like a shadow in the cave. If Naledi were so physically different, yet so behaviorally provocative, what else might they have done that we have not yet uncovered?
Deep within the rising star system lies the Naledi chamber, a place so remote and difficult to reach that even today, experienced cavers describe it as a claustrophobic nightmare of stone. To get there, scientists had to crawl through passageways so narrow they named one Superman's Crawl, where only by extending one arm forward and the other pinned to the side could the body slide through. And when those underground astronauts finally wriggled into the chamber, what they saw was nothing short of astonishing. Skeletal remains of multiple individuals, from infants to adults, clustered together in sediment that told no tale of flooding, predation, or natural trap. The bones bore no gnaw marks from carnivores, no scratches from being swept by rushing water, no evidence of catastrophic collapse. Instead, the placement suggested something deliberate, as though these bodies had been carried, one after another, into the chamber and left there. It was a hypothesis so bold that many scientists initially refused to accept it. Burial or deliberate deposition, after all, had long been considered a hallmark of symbolic thought, something reserved for Neanderthals in Shanidar Cave, who left their dead with flowers, or early Homo sapiens at Kafsa and Shkul in Israel, who interred bodies with grave goods. To suggest that Homo naledi, with brains a third the size, might have done the same was almost scandalous. Yet the evidence remained. More than 15 individuals in one chamber in one of the most inaccessible places imaginable. Lee Berger and colleagues, in their National Geographic Special Report 2015, described the eerie feeling of realizing that the fossils were not scattered across the cave system, but concentrated in a single hidden room. Imagine holding in your hands the tiny jaw of a child, and then setting it down beside the robust skull of an adult, knowing that both had been placed in this same chamber long ago. The thought that these beings, so different from us, might have carried their dead into darkness is haunting. Was it grief? Ritual? A practical way to dispose of bodies where scavengers could not reach? Each possibility cracks open new doors into the human story. As you picture that chamber, silent but for the whispers of explorers' breath, you feel the weight of a mystery that challenges what we thought we knew. That symbolic behavior belonged only to big-brained humans. But here, in the heart of a South African cave, perhaps a smaller-brained cousin had already taken that step, leaving behind not tools or art, but something even more profound, the suggestion of care for the dead.
The idea that Homo naledi deliberately placed their dead in the Naledi chamber sparked heated debate, dividing the scientific community into camps of skeptics and cautious believers. On one side were those who argued that the chamber could simply have been a natural trap, an unlucky pitfall into which individuals fell over centuries, their bodies accumulating like forgotten echoes. But when researchers examined the chamber's geometry, they realized this explanation was unlikely. To enter, one must navigate passages so complex and narrow that it would be improbable for even a single accidental fall, let alone 15 or more across ages, without external forces. Moreover, the fossils showed no catastrophic trauma that might accompany a deadly fall. Others suggested predation, but the absence of carnivore marks contradicted this. And so, slowly, the idea of intentional deposition gained ground. If so, what did this mean? To carry a body into the chamber would have required planning, cooperation, and light, torches or controlled fire to illuminate the passage. It would have required multiple individuals working together, sharing the goal of placing the corpse into a secret place. These are behaviors we associate with modern humans and Neanderthals, not with small-brained hominins. In the eLife article by Berger et al. 2015, the authors themselves used cautious language, speaking not of burial, but of deliberate deposition, as though they too felt the weight of the claim they were making. And indeed, the words matter. Burial implies ritual, symbolic meaning, perhaps even belief in an afterlife, while deposition may simply mean disposal. Yet even disposal demands a level of social awareness, an understanding of life and death, and an action beyond mere instinct. Close your eyes and imagine a small group of Homo naledi, their flickering fire casting shadows on limestone walls as they carry the body of a deceased child through a twisting passage. Imagine their grunts of effort, their pauses, their choice to leave the body in a hidden chamber, then to turn back and vanish into the night. Was this grief? Was it hygiene? Was it instinct? We may never know, but the fossils whisper a possibility that should unsettle us. That symbolic behavior did not blossom only with us, but sprouted earlier in minds we once dismissed as too small for such thoughts. The debate continues, fierce and unresolved, but the bones remain unmoved, lying as they have for hundreds of thousands of years, silent witnesses to a mystery we still struggle to comprehend. And as we look at them today, one haunting question remains. Who were they mourning, and what story did they believe they were telling when they left their dead in the dark?
Fire has always been one of the great markers of humanity, a flickering boundary between animal instinct and the dawn of culture. To control flame is not merely to gain warmth, but to gain mastery over time and space. To cook, to gather, to ward off predators, and to illuminate darkness. For decades, scientists believed that consistent, deliberate control of fire belonged to later stages of human evolution, particularly with Homo erectus perhaps beginning the process nearly 1 million years ago, and later perfected by Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. But when researchers began to examine the Rising Star Cave more carefully, they stumbled upon evidence that suggested something astonishing, that Homo naledi, with their small brains and seemingly primitive anatomy, may also have harnessed the power of fire. In 2022, Lieberger and his team reported in the Journal of Human Evolution that they had discovered signs of soot and ash on the walls and ceilings deep within the cave, as well as charred animal bones and blackened sediment layers. These traces could not be explained by natural fires, for no lightning bolt could strike the chamber. No wildfire could sweep into such an enclosed, suffocating place. Instead, the evidence implied that someone, or something, had carried flame into the depths of the rising star system. Imagine the scene. A group of Homo naledi, their torches sputtering and smoking, crouched as they made their way through twisting, suffocating tunnels. The flames flickered, reflecting off moist limestone, casting ghostly shadows that turned stalactites into monsters. The air thickened with smoke, the walls became streaked with soot, and at last they reached the Naledi chamber, where perhaps the torches were laid upon the ground, their embers smoldering as bodies were deposited. The presence of fire would have been essential. Without it, the journey would have been impossible. No human, no animal could navigate such pitch-dark passages unaided. If true, this would mean that Homo naledi were not simply scavengers of light, but creators of it, bearers of fire into the underworld. And this possibility, more than almost any other, forces us to reckon with what we thought we knew, that the command of fire belonged to big brains alone. The soot stains whisper otherwise, hinting that intelligence might wear many forms, and that even in the smallest cranium, a spark of mastery might flicker.
Of course, the suggestion that Homo naledi wielded fire has not gone unchallenged, and here the debate sharpens like flint against stone. Some skeptics argue that the soot and ash found in Rising Star could be the result of later human activity, that perhaps Homo sapiens or other hominins entering the cave in more recent times left traces of their torches behind. After all, caves are often revisited across generations, their passages tempting explorers, their chambers reused. But Berger's team countered this by noting the depth of deposition and the direct association of burnt remains with Naledi fossils, implying contemporaneity rather than intrusion. Others pointed out that controlling fire is one thing, but sustaining it deep underground is another. To carry torches through narrow, oxygen-thin corridors requires not only knowledge of ignition, but also persistence, planning, and social coordination. Could a small-brained hominin truly accomplish this? John Hawkes, one of Berger's collaborators, has argued that we cannot dismiss the possibility simply because it does not fit our old models. The evidence of charred bones, ash deposits, and blackened stone cannot be easily explained away. Picture again the eerie glow of fire inside the chamber, the smoke curling upward, staining ceilings that had not seen sunlight in hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine Naledi huddled together, the flames giving them a brief dominion over darkness, a technology that expanded their reach beyond daylight and starlight. If true, then these beings did not merely dispose of their dead in secret chambers, they engineered the very means to reach those chambers, shaping darkness with flame. And yet the absence of hearths, structured fire pits, or abundant charred artifacts leaves the case tantalizing but incomplete. Was it Naledi who lit those torches, or was it another species whose traces commingled with theirs? For now, the answer remains suspended in smoke, the evidence suggestive, but not definitive. And so we are left with a haunting thought. If fire really burned in Naledi hands, then the boundaries we drew between them and us, between small brains and big ideas, crumble like ash between our fingers. If the flames were theirs, then humanity's story is no longer a tale of steady ascent, but one of many fires burning in many minds, some extinguished, some passed on, and some still glowing faintly in the dark chambers of forgotten caves. And as we peer into those chambers, we must ask, are we staring into the past of a species unlike us, or are we catching a glimpse of ourselves in the very first sparks of light?
When the first reports emerged that the walls of the Rising Star Cave bore strange markings near where Homo naledi fossils had been found, the reaction was almost immediate. Could this be art? The first whispers of symbolic expression carved into stone by a small-brained hominin? The discovery was subtle, not flamboyant like the great paintings of Lascaux or the ochre engravings at Blombos Cave in South Africa, which date to around 75,000 years ago. Instead, what researchers observed were faint, deliberate-looking incisions on the walls of the chamber, lines crossing each other, forming patterns that seemed too regular to be random. Some appeared to be hash marks, others triangular shapes, and all of them situated in locations suggesting intentionality rather than accident. According to reports summarized in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Dirks et al., 2017, these markings were not superficial scratches caused by movement of rocks, nor were they the kind of abrasions one would expect from natural erosion. They seemed deliberate, but what did they mean? Close your eyes and imagine standing in that chamber, headlamp light catching faint grooves carved into limestone. The lines are shallow yet persistent, almost like whispers left by hands long gone. The thought that Homo naledi, with their small cranial capacity, might have used tools to inscribe stone is staggering, because it shifts the timeline of symbolic behavior further back than we ever imagined. Until then, archaeologists had attributed the earliest known symbolic engravings to Homo sapiens and perhaps Neanderthals, who left behind abstract carvings in caves like Gorham's in Gibraltar. But here, in South Africa, in association with beings whose brains were the size of chimpanzees, we may be seeing the glimmers of another intelligence. Some skeptics argue that the lines are too ambiguous, that humans are prone to imposing patterns where none exist, a tendency called pareidolia. Perhaps, they suggest, the scratches are the result of claws from animals brushing against rock, or even incidental damage from the shifting of stone. Yet to those who have seen the marks firsthand, the deliberate crossing of lines suggests otherwise. If intentional, they may represent something profoundly simple yet profound. A need to leave a trace, to mark presence, to claim identity in a world where memory otherwise vanishes with the body.
Imagine a small figure leaning close to the wall, a stone flake in hand, carving a shape not for survival, not for food or defense, but for meaning. It would be the dawn of art, flickering in the depths of a cave lit only by fire.
The possibility of symbolic markings by Homo naledi has opened a fierce debate, because art is one of the clearest lines we draw between ourselves and our ancestors. If they carved those marks intentionally, then the seeds of symbolic thinking sprouted in a brain far smaller than our own, and the implications are monumental. Consider that Neanderthals, with brains as large or larger than modern humans, left behind pigments, beads, and possible engravings. Their capacity for symbolic thought has long been acknowledged, though sometimes grudgingly. If Homo naledi did something similar, then intelligence may not be a straight road paved with increasing brain size, but a mosaic of different minds, finding different ways to express themselves. John Hawkes, in Conversations about the Rising Star Finds, has suggested that the marks may indeed represent purposeful actions, though caution remains in interpreting them as art in the full sense. But let us explore the possibility. What if these scratches were a kind of proto-writing, or tally marks, or even ritual symbols connected to deposition of the dead? Picture a group of Naledi entering the chamber, torches flickering, carrying the body of a relative. As they set it down, one individual approaches the wall, scraping a pattern with a stone tool, a gesture repeated over generations until the wall bore faint inscriptions of presence. No animals in nature leave such traces. Only humans and human-like beings inscribe meaning into surfaces. And if these marks were intentional, then they represent the first attempt of a small brain to make memory durable. Of course, the alternative explanations persist. Some argue that even if the lines are deliberate, they might not have symbolic value. They could simply be byproducts of sharpening tools, or absent-minded scratching during torch-lit pauses. The marks are ambiguous, faint, and without accompanying artifacts to clarify their purpose. Unlike later cave art, which is unmistakably aesthetic, these are mere grooves, easy to overlook. But ambiguity does not erase significance. As Paul Dirks and his colleagues noted in their 2017 publication, context is everything. The marks are located precisely where bodies were deposited, suggesting a relationship between the act of carving and the act of death. Whether ritual, memory, or practical action, the fact remains that someone, perhaps 250,000 years ago, pressed stone against stone and left behind traces still visible today. And so we are left with a haunting question. Were these scratches the earliest art, the first trembling gesture of meaning from a small mind? Or are we merely projecting our hunger for connection onto lines that signify nothing? The chamber keeps its silence, the grooves remain shallow, and the debate burns on. But one cannot stand in front of those marks without feeling that something, intentional, human-like, and haunting, once pressed itself into stone, determined not to vanish entirely.
The announcement of Homo naledi's possible symbolic behavior, burial, fire use, and even engravings, was not met with quiet acceptance. Instead, it ignited a storm that raged across conferences, journals, and newspaper headlines, splitting the scientific world between cautious supporters and outspoken skeptics. From the beginning, critics questioned whether the claims of deliberate deposition and cultural behavior were leaping too far ahead of the evidence. After all, paleoanthropology is a field built on fragments, and fragments can be misleading. As paleoanthropologist Tim White once warned, the danger in this field is not a shortage of fossils, but an excess of interpretation. When Berger and his colleagues published their first eLife papers in 2015, many scientists praised the sheer quantity of fossils, but balked at the implications. Could so small a brain truly carry out behaviors associated with symbolic thought? Ian Tattersall, author of Masters of the Planet, 2012, voiced skepticism, pointing out that symbolic behavior had always correlated with larger brain size, and that the idea of Homo naledi burying their dead seemed to break too many established rules at once. Others suggested that the bones might have accumulated through unknown natural processes, perhaps a hidden crevice once allowed bodies to tumble in, later sealed by shifting rock. Critics argued that without grave goods, without structured burial pits, without unambiguous hards or pigment use, the case for ritual was speculative. At the 2016 American Association of Physical Anthropologists meeting, debates grew heated, with some accusing Berger's team of sensationalism, designed for headlines rather than cautious science. Imagine the scene: a conference hall buzzing, scientists gathered in knots, some shaking their heads, others gesturing with animated defense, voices rising over coffee cups and projected slides. On one side, those who argued that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. On the other, those who reminded colleagues that dismissing possibilities simply because they challenge assumptions is equally unscientific. It became not merely a debate about fossils or geology, but about the philosophy of science itself, whether to protect paradigms until proof is ironclad, or to entertain bold hypotheses when evidence, though imperfect, points toward them.
Yet, amidst the skepticism, there were also voices urging openness, reminding the field that history has often punished those who clung too tightly to orthodoxy. Supporters of the Naledi interpretation pointed out that the fossil's context in the Naledi chamber, combined with suit traces and possible engravings, created a constellation of evidence difficult to dismiss as coincidence. John Hawkes argued that even if Homo naledi were not engaging in full-fledged ritual burial, their behavior still represented a cognitive leap. To transport bodies into a remote chamber, even for practical disposal, implied planning, cooperation, and the use of light. Chris Stringer of the Natural History Museum in London, while cautious, noted that the discovery forced a reconsideration of long-held assumptions about the relationship between brain size and intelligence. The Nature commentary by Wilkins and Chazan, 2012, though predating the Naledi discovery, had already emphasized that fire use and symbolic activity may have deeper roots than traditionally acknowledged. In that spirit, some anthropologists urge the community not to underestimate the cognitive potential of small-brain species. After all, size does not always dictate complexity. Crows, with walnut-sized brains, demonstrate tool use and problem-solving beyond what their cranial volume might predict. Could Homo naledi be a primate example of the same principle? Supporters also reminded skeptics that many behaviors once dismissed as impossible for ancient hominins, such as Neanderthal art or Denisovan jewelry, are now accepted realities, their legitimacy proven by discoveries decades after initial controversy. Imagine, then, how history might view us if we scoff at the possibility of Naledi's cultural behavior only to have later finds confirm it. Perhaps somewhere in Africa lies another chamber, untouched, filled with clearer evidence, pigments, carvings, or structured hearths. Until then, the rising star discovery stands as a battleground, with skeptics demanding stricter proof and supporters urging imagination. The fossils themselves remain silent, indifferent to human quarrels, but the debate they sparked reflects something profoundly human: our struggle to define intelligence, to draw the boundary lines of humanity, and to recognize or deny kinship with those whose minds were smaller, yet may have burned just as brightly. And as the argument continues, one question hovers like smoke above the field. Are we resisting the truth because it lacks evidence, or because it unsettles the story we want to tell about ourselves?
When the dust of debate settles, the question remains, what does Homo naledi mean for our story? The grand tapestry of human evolution that we thought we had already begun to stitch together. For more than a century, the model was simple, almost comforting. As brains grew larger, behavior became more complex, and symbolic life followed intelligence like a shadow. But Naledi fractures that neat narrative. Here was a species with a brain scarcely larger than a chimpanzee's, yet potentially depositing their dead, possibly controlling fire, and perhaps even leaving marks on cave walls that hint at symbolic thought. If these interpretations hold true, then the line between us and them blurs to the point of collapse. Suddenly, symbolic behavior is no longer the privilege of large-brained hominins, but a capacity that may have flickered across the evolutionary tree in multiple places, in multiple forms. As Yuval Noah Harari suggests in *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind, 2014, what sets humans apart is the ability to create shared fictions, myths, stories, rituals that allow cooperation beyond blood ties. If Naledi demonstrated even the beginnings of this symbolic capacity, then the roots of being human stretch deeper and wider than we ever imagined. Picture again Africa 250,000 years ago, a continent alive not just with our direct ancestors, but with overlapping species, each navigating survival in their own way. To the north, early Homo sapiens chipped at stone blades. To the west, perhaps Neanderthal cousins thrived. And in the south, small-brained Naledi crept into the depths of caves, carrying their dead, lighting torches, and scratching patterns into walls. It is not a linear story, but a mosaic, a chorus of voices, some louder, some quieter, some extinguished, yet all contributing to the symphony of what it means to be human. This realization forces us to reconsider the arrogance of our assumptions. Perhaps intelligence does not rise smoothly with brain size. Perhaps culture does not belong only to us. And perhaps humanity has always been a shared stage rather than a solo performance.
The broader implication of Homo naledi is that the human story is not just about us, it is about many. For decades, we have told a tale in which Homo sapiens eventually emerged as the sole inheritor of Earth, triumphing because of our unique intelligence and symbolic capacity. Yet each new discovery erodes that exclusivity. Neanderthals buried their dead and painted caves. Denisovans left jewelry and genetic legacies. And now Naledi may have carried fire into hidden chambers and left scratches of memory upon stone. The evolutionary tree begins to look less like a ladder and more like a dense, entangled forest, full of branches that lived, died, and sometimes intertwined. If small-brained Naledi were capable of symbolic behavior, then humanity's defining traits are not a single spark, but a scattered fire, igniting in different species, at different times, in different ways. Consider again the provocative possibility that when Homo sapiens were emerging in Africa, they were not alone in thinking, remembering, and perhaps even mourning. Imagine two groups meeting on the savannah. One tall, broad-browed, with a large skull. The other smaller, stranger, with curved fingers and narrower chests. Did they see each other as competitors? As threats? Or did they recognize, even faintly, a likeness? Did they sense in each other a shared awareness of life and death? These questions reshape anthropology into philosophy. For if symbolic behavior blooms in many forms, then humanity is not a single lineage, but a condition, a way of being that multiple species touched,
before vanishing into silence. As Harari reminds us, myths are what holds societies together, and perhaps Naledi too, in their own way, lived by myths we cannot reconstruct. The implications are profound. We are not alone in the past, never were, and our uniqueness is not absolute, but relative. The bones in Rising Star Cave, soot-stained ceilings, and faint wall scratches remind us that we may share with Naledi not just ancestry, but something more elusive: the urge to remember, to ritualize, to mark meaning upon the world. And so when we tell the story of humanity, perhaps we must widen the stage, giving voice not only to our direct ancestors, but to those smaller cousins who, in flickering firelight, may have whispered their own stories into the dark. The journey into the past has become a journey into ourselves to shake the foundations of what we thought we knew about our uniqueness.
In the end, the story of Homo naledi is less about definitive answers than it is about the unsettling beauty of unanswered questions, the kind that leave us staring into the darkness of a cave and wondering what shadows move just beyond the light. Every fossil from Rising Star Cave tells a story, but it is a story written in fragments: a skull here, a hand there, the soot on the ceiling, the faint grooves on stone. None of it speaks in full sentences. Instead, the evidence whispers, and it is we who try to make sense of those whispers. Were the bodies in the Naledi chamber placed there intentionally, as the National Geographic report in 2015 suggested, or did geology conspire to gather them by chance? Were the fire traces discovered and described in the Journal of Human Evolution, 2022, truly the work of Naledi torches or the residue of later visitors? Are the wall markings symbolic gestures, as Dirks et al. 2017 hinted, or are they the kind of scratches that our hungry imagination transforms into meaning? These questions resist closure. And perhaps that resistance is itself the gift. For too long, we told the story of human origins as a straight line of progress: brains swelling, intelligence growing, symbolism blooming, until finally Homo sapiens stood alone in the spotlight. But Naledi destabilized that tidy tale, dragging us back into the shadows, reminding us that humanity may have been more diverse, more scattered, more plural than we ever wanted to admit. Imagine the firelight of Naledi torches guttering against limestone walls. Imagine their hands setting down the body of a relative. Imagine the scratching of stone against stone, a gesture that might have meant everything or nothing. In that imagining, we are forced to confront our own reflection, that perhaps what makes us human is not certainty, but the search for meaning, not the possession of truth, but the willingness to carve questions into stone and leave them for the future to puzzle over. And in that way, the Naledi may not simply be our distant cousins, they may be our mirrors, holding up to us the reminder of the line between fact and imagination has always been porous, and that the greatest mysteries are those that force us to see ourselves anew.
So what, then, do we carry forward from the caves of Rising Star? Perhaps it is humility. The humility to recognize that the human story is not ours alone, that other species once walked beside us, fought beside us, and maybe even mourned beside us. The humility to accept that brain size is not destiny, that intelligence comes in many forms, that fire may have burned in minds we once dismissed as too small. The humility to admit that our search for origins is not a quest for neat answers, but a dialogue with ghosts, with bones, with ashes, with faint marks scratched into stone. As Yuval Noah Harari wrote in Sapiens 2014, myths are what allow humans to weave meaning into existence. And perhaps Naledi, too, wove myths of their own,
Stories we will never recover, but stories nonetheless. In that possibility lies both wonder and grief. Wonder at the thought that the universe once echoed with multiple versions of humanity. Grief that so many voices have gone silent. But silence does not mean absence. Every fossil in Rising Star is a presence. Every soot mark, a trace. Every groove, a testimony that something more complex was happening in those chambers than we yet understand. Close your eyes and picture it. A dark chamber, firelight flickering, shadows dancing on limestone, bodies laid in silence. And somewhere in that silence, a question that still burns. Were they like us? Did they feel grief? Did they dream? Did they tell stories in the dark? We may never know, but in the act of asking, we extend to them the dignity of kinship, the recognition that they are part of our story, whether or not they fit neatly into our definitions. And so, as we leave the Rising Star Cave behind and step back into the daylight of our own world, we carry with us not conclusions, but invitations. To wonder, to question, to keep listening to the whispers of the past. For perhaps that is the true legacy of Homo naledi, not answers carved in stone, but questions that refuse to die. And as you reflect on those questions, ask yourself, what does it mean to be human, and who else might we have once shared that meaning with? If mysteries like these ignite your imagination, then stay with us. Subscribe, explore, and journey deeper into the shadows of our shared history, where every discovery is not an ending, but the beginning of a new story waiting to be told.
In the end, the tale of Homo naledi is not one that offers us the comfort of closure, but rather the exhilaration of wonder. A reminder that the human journey has always been more mysterious, tangled, and profound than we dare to imagine. Picture once more the hidden corridors of the Rising Star Cave, the suffocating passages where light dies and silence reigns, the soot-stained ceilings whispering of forgotten flames, the bones of 15 individuals lying in uneasy rest, and the faint scratches etched into stone as if someone, long ago, insisted that their presence not be erased. Each of these fragments, bones, ash, markings, teeters between fact and imagination, between data and story, leaving us suspended in a space where science brushes against philosophy. Were these small-brained beings mourners of their dead, or simply pragmatists disposing of bodies where predators could not reach? Were the flames they carried sparks of symbolic thought, or mere tools of necessity? Were the lines on the wall the first trembling gestures of art, or only accidents of stone against stone? We cannot know for certain, and yet the very act of asking transforms us, reminding us that humanity is not a straight path of progress, but a labyrinth of experiments, a chorus of lost voices echoing in the dark. Homo naledi forces us to confront the fragility of our definitions, intelligence, ritual, art, humanity itself. Perhaps they are not absolutes, but gradients, shared capacities that flickered across multiple branches of our family tree before vanishing into silence. And so, as we step back from the cave and return to the daylight of our own age, we carry with us not only the mystery of who they were, but the deeper mystery of who we are. For in their bones we glimpse the possibility that we are not alone in our capacity for meaning, that the longing to remember, to ritualize, to leave marks against the void may be older, smaller, stranger than we ever thought. That realization is both humbling and liberating, reminding us that to be human is not to possess all the answers, but to live inside the questions, to keep searching, keep imagining, keep listening to the echoes in the dark. And so I leave you with this. If beings with brains the size of an orange could carry fire into the underworld, mourn their dead, and perhaps inscribe symbols into stone, then what excuse do we, with our vast brains and vast world, have for failing to carve meaning into our own lives? Think about that as you drift from this story into your own. And if you want to journey further into the forgotten corners of history, the shadows of prehistory, and the mysteries that redefine what it means to be human, stay with us, subscribe, explore, and keep walking with us into the caves of time, where every discovery is not the end of the story, but the beginning of another question waiting in the dark.